Hi guys, welcome back. So it's new scope day today. Well, I've actually had this since before Christmas. I've had a good play with it already, and I've decided that it's now going to go on the MX Katran. This is actually going to replace the Optical CP that I've been using for a good while on there. I've sort of run out of magnification with that, and this seems like it's going to fit the bill perfectly. Slightly different compared to the stuff that we normally have on the channel. This is actually quite an inexpensive scope in the grand scheme of things. The Veyron range generally run from about 150 to 200 pounds. Actually a very broad range of scopes in both first and second focal plane. This is the first focal plane one. They do a number of different models in the second focal plane. They do a couple of compact ones. Now they all share quite compact bodies on them. There's a few interesting things you need to be aware of if you're looking at some of the compact scopes, because they have a slightly reduced eye relief and they've got much shorter body to them. You've got slightly limited mounting arrangements. So we're going to talk about some of the options and some of the considerations you should make if you're looking at a compact scope. Now I've switched mostly over to first focal plane. We pretty much do target shooting and testing and things, and they work very well on the channel here. But maybe if you're a pest controller, or maybe you want to do a bit of informal hunt field target, potentially the second focal plane versions might be a good idea. So I'm going to give you a quick look around this because it's a very well thought out scope. Got a beautiful reticle in it, and the glass is surprisingly well put together, especially for under 200 quid. I've been very, very surprised. Over the last few years, I've kind of neglected the more entry level end of the market. I don't tend to work in that sort of stuff, but a lot of you have said, can we see some more inexpensive stuff? Some of the other stuff you're using, some of the rifles, they are pretty expensive. So I'm making an effort now to bring in some more affordable, some more relatable stuff to the channel. And going forward, I'm hoping that this is going to find a good home on the Katran for the moment, and then some of the new entry-level rifles going forward. But I've got to be honest, first impressions of this, it's a very well put together scope for what is, in the grand scheme of things, a very modest price. So I'll move the camera around and I'll show you it. Right, let's have a quick look around it. So this is the 6:24 magnification. We have got a 44mm objective. Now the actual model number for this is the SCFF37. Now they do various different models in first and second focal plane. So this is the first focal plane version. It's a well put together scope. It's got quite reassuring weight to it. It certainly doesn't feel flimsy. This particular model has a magnification range from 6 magnification all the way around to 24 magnification, and we've got a 44mm objective, so it's a sort of mid-sized scope, not too big, not too small. This will go on the majority of typical air rifles, no bother whatsoever. It'd also work really quite well actually on some lightweight sort of 2.2 LRs. If you're out pest controlling, this would be quite a good one to go for. Turrets on here, push-pull locking turrets, so you can lock them back down to make your adjustments. You lift it up, that frees off the adjustment. The clicks actually feel really quite nice. Not as aggressive as you'd find in a big modern day PRS scope, but that's not really what this is. But they feel certainly pretty good. Locks down with a nice snap. Same on the windage here. Quite happy with that. Once that's locked down, there's no real appreciable play in there. Both the windage and the elevation are resettable to 0, so you'd use a coin in the top here or one of those nylon little tools just to loosen that off. We'll do that once we've set it up. I'll show you how to reset that to 0. All of the functions on here, all of the adjusters feel nice and smooth. Now this has got a bit of a knurling on here. Probably be a good idea actually on the side focus adjustment to add a little fishing coaster like I've got on a lot of the others. Now this focus is down to 10 yards at full magnification, which I can't imagine you'd ever want to use it like that, but you certainly can do. Again, nice and smooth all the way through, but because of the smaller turret you've got here, I find it a little bit awkward to grip, so I will definitely put a coaster on there. Got a lovely illuminated reticle in here, half mil dot reticle. The turrets are in 1/10 of mil dots as well, so you'll get 10 clicks per mil dot. It coincides with the layout of the reticle beautifully. So the illumination on here is just the center dot that's illuminated. We've got 6 illumination settings, and between each setting we've got an off position, so you don't have to spin it all the way back round to the single off. You can go from 5 off, 6, you can go back and forwards as you need to depending on your light conditions. So very well put together. It comes with some mounts in the box. I'll show you those now. Right, so in the box, this mount doesn't come with it. This is one of my own ones, this long one piece. But you do get a set of mounts with it. You get a set of 30mm. Of course, that's the tube size of the scope. We get some of these basic Picatinny rings in a high. Also comes with an Allen key in here. Now these particular mounts, these are the same as what I'm running on the Katran at the moment, so they're not a bad mount. And actually we're going to talk about these when we get up the farm. They're quite a narrow mount. That's going to come in quite handy when we put the compact scope on the MX Katran. We get a honeycomb sunshade with it. So instead of getting your typical tubular sunshade, you've got a honeycomb one. Now I do personally tend to prefer a tubular one, but this comes with it. Interesting choice really, but of course that will potentially stop any reflections coming back to your quarry or whatever you're shooting at. You know, that's what they're designed for. We've also got this little tool here, so this is for resetting the turrets. It's simply just a piece of plastic, nylon-y sort of stuff with some rounded edges, just instead of using a coin to reset the turrets so you won't mark them up. Very, very useful thing to have. Keep it in your spares box. Also came with a pair of flip ups. Now I won't be using those, but they've got quite a nice rubbery feeling to them. If that's your thing, great. Doesn't flip fully right back, that one, the objective one there, but certainly a pair of useful flip ups if you need them. 5-year warranty apparently. I'm not sure what the warranty procedure would be for something like this. Generally quite fuss free. Normally the thing you would do is speak to your retailer, whoever you get it from, wherever you buy your scope from. That's your first port of call in the UK. But yeah, 5-year warranty, under 200 quid. If it lasts just 5 years, it's 40 quid a year, so you can't really go too far wrong with that. One thing I would say with these, there's always quite a big price variation between retailers on the Vector stuff, so do shop around, do your due diligence and have a good look around and see where you're buying it from, because I'd say quite a lot of difference in prices. In fact, I've seen these down as low as 175 quid recently, which is a bit annoying. However, they definitely shop about for the Vector stuff. Right, let's go and get it on the katran. We'll get it up the farm. The sun's out, it's bitter cold, but it's a lovely day for filming. It's a nice day for shooting, so let's go and get it set up, shall we? Right, as you can see, she's went on beautifully, absolutely no problems whatsoever. Now, these are the supplied high mounts that it came with. The katran itself is a little bit unusual. It's got a very long Picatinny rail along the top here. Most typical rifles, if I was fitting this for, let's say for instance, to my S510, it's got a much shorter dovetail rail on the back here. It doesn't come back past the trigger quite as far as this. So in that case, I would have to use a mount like this. So you may have to consider some reach backwards mounts. I mean, normally you get a pair of mounts, one's a reach back and one's a standard one. So you'd normally, what is that making a racket? The geese are making a racket. So if this was on the S510 for instance, you'd need a reach rearward mount on the back here, because the rail is actually likely to be up here. So you'd have your mounts in this sort of configuration. Or of course you could go for something like this. Now this is quite an extreme offset mount. I've been playing with this on some other bits and pieces, but maybe you could also go for a one-piece mount with a sort of a small offset. Bear in mind that relative to the trigger, most dovetail rails, a lot of Picatinny rails will stop around here, sort of almost an inch further forward than this one does. Now with this narrower mount on here in the last little groove on the Picatinny rail, I've still got a bit of wiggle room, but that's really down to the sort of shape and the layout of the katran. A lot of other traditional rifles, you are likely to need a reach rearward mount. The other consideration as well, because of the compact form of the scope here, the flare in the objective bell. Now I could definitely go down a little bit in mount height. These are highs. You need to pay attention up the front here as well. That will be a limiting factor here. So I'm quite lucky with the katran here. The supplied mounts still give me a bit of wiggle room, but again, you just need to be a little bit careful. If you are unsure, there will almost certainly be an awful lot of information on the various forums. People will have attempted to fit these already. These have been around for a long time. It's not a new scope. It's not unusual. This compact sort of nature of the scopes is becoming more popular. So there's all sorts of different mounting arrangements, but just factor in that some rifles you may not be able to get away with the standard mounts that it comes with to keep the eye relief you want. So let's go and get it set up. I've got some JSB heavies. We're going to run those through it quickly, bring it onto a 0. We'll have a play, shall we? Right, although the sun's out around the corner, it's absolutely freezing around here. The worst thing about doing scope videos is trying to get actual pictures through the scope itself of what the reticle looks like. I have finally, 25 minutes later, managed to get a few pictures. So I've got some pictures. Here's the reticle at 6 times magnification. Now currently we're just under 25 yards, the usual spot that we do all of our testing. It's relatively sheltered. When we come to running the JSB heavies off, we do have a bit of a headwind. I've got you quite tucked out the way, out of the wind a little bit at the moment. So this is 6 magnification. Now you can see that the reticle itself is very, very fine on the lower magnifications. When you bump it up to 10 mag, this is what it looks like. And then this is up at 20 mag. Now, of course, as the magnification goes up, basically I can't get a decent picture at all above 20 mag. Now, through it by eye, it looks pretty clear. I mean, at this price point, it's very, very sharp. It's got decent clarity right to the edge. Of course, as the magnification goes up, the image darkens off a little bit. I mean, at this price point, it's more than acceptable. And I've got to be frank, at the moment, it is incredibly good for that price point. I think it fits on here quite nicely, and I don't really see, for the sort of mid-range testing and things that we're going to do, I think this is going to last quite well on the channel here. We're going to do quite well with this. I don't think it's going to be holding us back for the stuff that we are doing. Of course, I won't be using this in really extreme conditions. We won't be pushing the ranges out to the extremes. We've got other stuff for that. In fact, I've got another new scope which we will be using for that. So in a following video, we're going to do a different video on a different scope. Now, this is not a new scope. They've been around for a long time. If you are working within a budget, it's always best to avoid things that are unknown, new models, things like that. Stick to something that's well known, well established, and you know exactly what you're getting. It's generally a safer bet when you're working within a tighter budget. I've got to be honest, at the moment, I'm really quite surprised. I have neglected some of the cheaper range stuff over the last few years, and yeah, I probably shouldn't have done, because this seems pretty good. So let's get it set up quickly. This is a fresh batch of JSB heavies. We've not used these ones before. Now I'm just going to aim, I'm going to put that onto 15-16 mag, just aiming straight for the centre of the card. Now this has a 20 MOA rail in it, so that's an inclination of only 0.3 of a degree, so the scope is looking down over the pellet's flight path a little bit, but it should put us somewhere near the optical zero. So I'm aiming for the very centre of the card. I'm hoping that the point of impact is going to be pretty close. Now this has got a relatively small internal adjustment range on the scope itself, but coupled with the 20 MOA that's built into the rail of this should mean that when we get it set up, we can probably push it out to 70 yards plus on the crosshairs, which is going to be very useful. Right, so at that point, I'm almost exactly half a mil dot to the right. Now, because this is first focal plane, it's always scaled. We have 1/10 mil dot clicks. I've got half mil dot, so I need to give it 5 clicks to the left and 2.5, maybe 3 clicks down. So this should hopefully put us on the centre line of the card. I haven't adjusted the elevation yet. Perfect. These aren't grouping too tightly. Probably best to use a known batch of decent pellets when you're setting a new scope up, however. I saw that skew off slightly actually. That back down. And we need to bring that down a couple of clicks. 1, 2, 3. Oh, that's 4. So the first focal plane setup makes it very easy just to measure off of the image that you see and make your appropriate clicks. Now let's go at that top left target. Ooh. There we go. I'm not entirely sure that this is a particularly well suited batch of pellets to this, but the scope itself is tracked as it needs to. These are quite well known to be a fairly solidly tracking scope, especially at this price point. It's not a big PRS scope that you're going to be whipping back and forwards between 30 and 150 yards all the time. Generally you'll set this to your 0 point and then use your holdover accordingly, but it seems to be tracking pretty well. In fact, I know it tracks pretty well. I've had a play of it already. Right, so that's what the pellets are doing today. My fingers are freezing cold. Now, had this been a second focal plane scope, we'd have to adjust our aim points. We'd have to hold over accordingly depending on our magnification range. We don't have any of that to do in the first focal plane version, but of course the second focal plane version, the reticle is going to stay the same size. So if you are shooting hunter field target, maybe into dark woodland, definitely pest controlling, potentially the second focal plane version will be the better option for you, because the reticle will stay the same size, the image is just zoomed in and out behind it. Now of course that does mean more things to remember with holdover and your aim points, but having that slightly broader reticle is definitely going to be better in low light situations. Certainly if this was going to be an all-out HFT competition scope for me, I would want the second focal plane version over the first focal plane version. However, given that most of the shooting we do on the channel is over fixed distances, known distances, we're shooting good light out at the longer ranges, the first focal plane version is definitely going to suit me very, very well. Now, for the most part, on the channel here, I'll use this between 10 and 20 magnification. The very lower end of the magnification, the reticle is just too fine, and at the very highest end of the magnification range, of course, the image gets marginally darker, which it happens on every scope regardless of price. Around the outside of my grey target box, I'm getting a small bit of fringing. There's sort of a little bit of a yellow line around it. It's quite low light at the moment, Sun's just creeping round behind us at the moment, hopefully you can see, but it's certainly not enough to detract from a pretty sharp image. The whole of that target itself is crisp and clear. Now that doesn't reach the very outside edges of the image that I can see, so it's not massively clear all the way across the lenses. You can see there's a slight bit of chromatic aberration at the edges, but I mean that's more than acceptable. In fact, it's got a really nice image. Right, just had to come back round into the sun because it's absolutely freezing. Now of course you've just seen that I've made some adjustments on the windage here. I'm not going to adjust or reset the elevation turret at the moment, but the windage I am. So we gave it a few clicks to bring it back onto the centre line. And all you do is just make sure that your turret is locked down, find the appropriate key on the top there, just slacken off that little nut in the middle. And all we need to do is carefully lift that off. Just going to come the other side of the camera. Pull that clean off is the easiest option. And then right, so the turret sits on a little spline. That's now effectively reset to 0, but we need to carefully put the cap back in. Hold that down while you're doing it. This doesn't need to be dogged up super tight, but of course you don't want to be losing one in the field. Now of course we can do exactly the same with the elevation turret here, but we have only moved that a few clicks from its optical centre, so I'm not going to worry about that one for the moment. When we start pushing the ranges out, maybe we'll re-zero this at sort of 50 to 60 yards. So right, let's get this back home because I'm absolutely freezing. I'm really impressed with this, relatively inexpensive, certainly punches well above its price point, and I'm surprised that I've neglected the entry-level stuff for quite a while now. Probably wasn't a wise move because that is pretty good. I've been really impressed with the Sentinel X that I'm using for my bench rest at the moment on the XTI 50. That's doing me really proud. I suppose I shouldn't have expected anything less. Right, I'll see you at home. Right, we're back. It's absolutely freezing. That light's fading. It's so cold, but the little Vector Veyron, this is the 6 to 24 by 44 in the first focal plane, so far has exceeded all my expectations, especially at this price. Now, it would be unfair to compare this to more expensive models, different brands and things like that, because of course this is sub 200 quid. In most cases you can get these for around 180 quid, about the same sort of price that I paid for the Sentinel X. Now I've been running the Sentinel now for what, 4 months, 5 months possibly, in a bench rest configuration on the XTI, and it's doing really well. So there's nothing really that compares to the Sentinel X at its price point that has a reticle sort of completely suitable for bench rest. So it is one that will do what it needs to, but it is doing very well. Lack of technique is letting me down more than the scope is on the bench rest circuit. However, this as an all-rounder for typical pest control, mid to longer range target shooting work is definitely worth looking at. Optically, at this price point, it's very good. Yes, you get a bit of fringing around the edges. Yes, there's a bit of chromatic aberration. Yes, the image dulls off a little bit at the very high end, but that's completely expected at this sort of money. We're not paying £4 for a March. This is a sub 200 quid scope. If that's the sort of budget that you've got, I don't think you're going to go far wrong with this. Now, I did an awful lot of research before I got this one. A lot of my friends use these, a lot of my customers use these, and a couple of the guys at the range have them as well. Now, just before Christmas, one of the chaps at the range, I had to play with his one of those. It was the 3 to 12 version, the smaller version. Even indoors under the LED light, the image quality was very good, so I decided then that's what we needed going forward. Now, I won't be using this at the extremes of magnification. I won't be using it at the lower end. I'm pretty much going to be using it from 10 to 20 magnification. That's the sort of sweet spot to get the best of this. That's what I got it for. It's going to suit what we need on the channel here. Now, if you do tend to use a lot of the lower magnifications, if you're pest controlling and stuff like that, potentially I'd be looking at the second focal plane versions over the first focal plane ones. So as a package, it's really quite well put together. It feels solid. It weighs 701 grams actually, so it's quite a chunky little scope. Now, on account of the slightly reduced eye relief, it's about just over half an inch shorter eye relief on this than you'll find on a lot of typical scopes. Just sits it a little bit further back on the actual rifle itself. So although it's quite chunky, it's not going to make it handle any worse. In fact, it's probably going to handle quite nicely being as it's back towards you. It should bring the weight and the balance point back to you a little tiny bit. So certainly not going to make the rifle unwieldy. nice little kit really. I can't really find much fault with it. We've got a little tiny bit of backlash in the old parallax wheel here, nothing too out of the ordinary at this price point. I can't really pick too many holes. I absolutely love the reticle in this. It's not cluttered, nice just centre dot. I'm struggling to pick any holes really. Same with the Sentinel. Yes, there's other scopes that are significantly more expensive that are better than this, but at that price point you really can't beat it. I'll go as far to say as this is potentially the best sub 250 quid scope on the market if you're after an all-rounder. This is more of a competition specific scope. This is not necessarily an all-rounder, but this very much is. So if you're shooting, is anything like we do on the channel here, lots of pellet testing and sort of target shooting, metal plate targets, paper punching, bit of pest control, I think you could do an awful lot worse than looking at the Veyron range. Take your time, try and find the right model from the range that will suit you. Whether that happens to be a first or second focal plane, that's going to be down to you and your eyesight. But yeah, I'm really quite happy with that. I'm looking forward to using it going forward. Definitely think it's going to be good for the channel going forward. And it's opened my eyes to some more of the entry level stuff. I've kind of neglected it a little bit over the last few years, but I'm very, very surprised how quickly this entry level equipment's sort of improving. Only a few years ago, you'd have been paying 500 quid for something with this optical clarity. 10 years ago, you'd have been paying more than that for something with this optical clarity. So really quite impressed with that. Next video, guys, we're going to have another scope video as soon as I get a wind-free day, because we're going to push the ranges right out. I've got a new scope for the other XTI. You've seen it already, but I'm going to do a proper review on that. So I'll see you in the next one.